Hi, everybody. My name is Diego. I am the Program Director for Curriculum and File Production here at LAMDL. And in this video, we're going to be talking about what flowing is and why we do it in some specific ways. So I'm going to be giving you some tips on how to flow. I'm going to be talking to you all about the golden rules of it, as well as the intended goals behind flowing. So when we flow, we use this really long piece of legal paper. It's a slightly longer than your average printer paper. If you don't have this specific type of paper, that's fine. You can use regular size paper to do this as well. But I want you to follow some specific rules when it comes to flowing, which is just how we take notes of debates. The intended goals for flowing are to see how arguments interact, to maximize line by line potential, and to predict your opponent's strategy. So I'm going into this video thinking that you've watched the overview and line by line video. So you should be well equipped to understand what's going on with this piece of flow right here. Before we talk about what's actually going on in the flow and to show you how flowing correctly helps you maximize your line by line potential as well as predict your opponent's strategy, there are some golden rules that I want you to follow when you're flowing. The first rule is to always label your flow. I mean, two things by that. The first one is label the speeches at the very top of your columns. So you'll see that at the very top, I have the 1AC, the 1NC, and so forth. The only two speeches that I do not have labeled are the 2NC and the 1NR, and that is because up here at the very middle, I've titled it the block. That just means it's both the 2NC and the 1NR. The reason I combine that into one column is because they are back-to-back negative speeches, and it would just look weird if you flowed the 2NC and the 1NR at the just all next to each other. It would just look clunky because the point of the flow is to see how negative arguments interact with the affirmative and vice versa. If you would have two back-to-back negative speeches, it would just like extremely just like messy. You wouldn't be able to compare what's going on between the 2NC and the 1AR, for example. So label your speeches at the top. It'll help you figure out where you want to flow your arguments. And then the second thing I mean by labeling is at the very bottom, put what type of argument you are flowing on the specific piece of paper. If you're in the rookie division, you only have to label your piece of flow paper case because that is all that's available to you in the rookie division. But if you're in the novice, JV, varsity, and onwards, you want to be labeling your flow according to which position it is. So it could be a counterplan, dissat, topicality. Just have separate papers for each of them because they're all their own separate arguments. The second golden rule is to write in shorthand. So what I mean by that is you don't want to be writing out full words most of the time. You want to be writing down shorthand labels of words so you're able to get more arguments in. What you'll notice about this piece of flow paper is that the columns are very thin. So what that means is you want to conserve the amount of like writing you do so that way all of your words can fit inside one speech's column. So some examples where I do some shorthand on this piece of flow are where it says plan right here up DSM. That's just shorthand for the plan increases deep sea mining. Where it says right after it says no REMs now, it means no rare earth minerals now. After that, it says REMs K2 decarb. That means rare earth minerals are key to decarbonization. So write in shorthand in ways that is legible to you. If you end up going too much to the extreme and you don't understand what you wrote in your shorthand, then it's not useful. So just make sure that you write in legible shorthand and continue practicing what makes more sense to you. At the end of the day, the flow is only meant to be legible to you, not to your partner or not even to like your coaches if they want to see it after or the round. The point is that the flow should be helping you. It's a plus if it helps like that you and your partner can both read it, but at the end of the day it should be able to help you only because then you can communicate to your partner what it is that your flow is telling you in the round. The third thing goes hand in hand with the stuff I said about the block. Just 7 columns. You don't need a separate column for the 2NC and the 1NR since they're back to back. You can just flow it as the block. So what you'll see is in total, I have 7 speech columns. Fourth is separate colors for each side. So what you'll see here is for the affirmative, I'm flowing only in purple. For the negative, I'm flowing in this like teal turquoise color. The reason I want you to do that is because you're going to be able to see how arguments interact between both sides a lot more clearly. If everything is the same color, some arguments are going to be so close and look like one side saying it when in reality it's the other side saying it. You do not want to get confused on basic misconceptions like that. Just flow in separate colors. Black and blue works, black and red, whatever you want. Just make sure that it's two separate colors, one for each side in the debate. And then 5 is big spaces in between evidence starting in the 1NC. What I mean by that is what you'll see is the 1AC has like considerable space in between, but in the 1NC, when we start with this argument that says turn right here at the 1NC column, I start having really big spaces in between after for each argument. The reason is because as you'll see, once the 2AC column starts, the arguments start proliferating across each argument. So against this argument in the 1NC that says turn DSM bad for CC, again, if you can't read my writing, that's just the first 1NC argument. You'll see that the 2AC has at least 3 different arguments against it. This is my bad, but one more golden rule that I want you to keep in mind is what I want you to notice is at the top of every flow, there's about a third of the column empty for the 1AC, 1NC, and then it starts getting filled up for the 2AC and the block. And then if the debate were to progress, the 1AR, 2NR, and 2AR would have the same third space, third of the top space of the flow empty. The reason is because I saved that space for the overview. What I mean by overview is just the general summary that each side gives. Overviews tend to be really long. It usually starts off short in the 2AC and then it just gets progressively longer with each speech. So I would leave a third of the space open for the overview. So that way each side gets their chance to just like explain why they should win the round, set the win conditions for each side. And then you can go into like the actual arguments and the debate being had. So my 6th golden rule would be overview space at the top. Leave at least a third of the page open. It's going to look like a lot of empty space. Just leave it open. I promise you that the overview is going to fill up that space, if not more of that space. So with that being said, let's go over the actual flow so you can see how this flow meets the intended goals, to see how arguments are interacting, to see how this flow can maximize line by line potential for each side, and then how you can use your flow to predict your opponent's strategy. So for the sake of this example, we're going to pretend that we are affirmative. All right, so this is us. We're affirmative and we're analyzing our flow so far. So the 1AC is flowed, the 1NC, we start with the 1NC right here, and what you'll immediately see is that I am immediately putting a bunch of space in between right here. That's a lot of space that's in between for each 1NC card. You'll see just like with the marker that is just a ton of space. The reason I want to have that much space open is because I know that the 2AC speech, whether it's me or my partner, we're going to just like unload a bunch of arguments against each piece of evidence, right? The 1NC in this case has only introduced 3 pieces of evidence. I'm not just going to make 3 different arguments. I'm going to make a couple of them using that line by line lecture that is posted on LAMDL. So before we do any of the line by line, the 2AC stands up and says an overview. So that's why we leave this third of this of the space open at the top of the flow paper to make sure that we have space for the overview. The 2AC didn't use all of it, but as you can see, the block is going to take a bit more use of that space. So just make sure that you have that space open for the overview. After that, what we'll see is because we've left so much space, we've allowed enough space to see how the arguments are fully interacting with each other. So for example, with this 1NC argument that says turn DSM bad for climate change, the 2AC makes 3 different arguments. It doesn't matter what these 3 arguments are right now. You don't need to know what the 3 arguments are. You just need to know that 3 arguments were made. And what you'll see is that against this 1NC argument, the 2AC has made 3 different things that require a lot of space. Imagine if I had jumbled this DSM fails tech argument all the way like up here instead of where it is like over here. If I had bunched it over here, it would look like these 2AC arguments are also answering the DSM fails tech argument, the second 1NC argument. That's the reason why we want to space things out, to make sure that these like confusions don't happen. Because what you'll see is that if I keep scrolling down on this flow, the 2AC has a bunch of more arguments to make against these next 1NC arguments. So The other thing to look at is the 2AC said group these two arguments, and then they answered it with the three same arguments. What I want you to notice is that when a debate argument is grouped, it just means that the speaker is answering two different arguments by using the same set of arguments or by just one. So against these two 1 and C arguments, DSM fails for tech reasons, and this last one, DSM fails for environmental reasons. The 2AC grouped it and said that these three arguments are going to apply just as the same as it would to the other argument. So just another thing to keep in mind, it's something that debaters tend to do. If that ever happens, what I suggest is just drawing these lines right here that you see on the flip here to indicate that they've been grouped. But I've also, wrote down grouped here for good measure. So that's the reason why there should be a lot of space. So now we're looking at the blocks. All right, everybody, let's talk about how we can predict our opponent's strategy using the flow. So we've already seen how we can maximize line by line potential, right? With the 2AC, when we see that the arguments are spread out, we can start making multiple arguments against them, and we can see how they interact. The last part of the flow, which I think is the most crucial, is seeing how we can use it to predict our opponent's strategy. And the way we can do that is by just looking at the patterns of argumentation according to the flow. So remember, we're affirmative in this example, and we're listening to the block, and we're flowing the block right now. So the block is saying a couple of these things that say, they start with an overview that says plan makes the environment worse. DSM is bad for the environment. So deep sea mining bad for the environment. They have an overview right here. You'll see that compared to the 1AC or to the 2AC, I mean, that they have a lot more ink on the flow. What I just mean by that is, remember that third of the space we saved? They're using a lot more of it, and they're using it to directly counter what the 2AC says. So just to translate what the 2AC said, the 2AC says plan solves climate change that outweighs the risk of a turn. So they're saying that the plan solving climate change is a higher risk than deep sea mining being bad for the environment. The block responds by saying the plan makes the environment worse. So they're extending the deep sea mining turn here. And then after that, they're saying deep sea mining is bad for the environment. There's a higher risk because their evidence is more qualified. So they're adding something in their overview that counters directly what was said in the 2AC overview. Now, let's look through the actual blocks argumentation now. So remember, this is a combination of the 2NC and 1NR. So they start off by saying extend the turn. They extended some 1NC evidence according to this flow in response to this first 2AC argument right here. So we're seeing a straight line through these arguments, and this is how the arguments are interacting. So if this were an actual speech, the negative would be saying things like, extend the turn, deep sea mining makes climate change worse. Our 1NC evidence says blah, blah, blah. The 2AC's first argument is extending Dawson and that their author is better because they come from this Cornell Institute. The negative says our evidence is better because it comes from real studies using real numbers. So we see how it is directly engaging in line by line right there. So circled it right there, drawn a line. After that, the 2AC says evidence is wrong, author is not a researcher. The negative says this thing called CA. Now, they did not say California. They said cross apply. So this is another example of debate language that you want to learn how to flow pretty quickly. Cross apply just means that the negative is using the same argument to answer a different argument. So, for example, where the negative right here has said at the very top that negative evidence is better because of real studies using real numbers, they said in response to 2AC2 that says the negatives evidence is wrong, cross apply the answer from above. So as the judge, I know that the answer to this argument that the negatives evidence is wrong because the author is not a researcher, the negative cross applies the response from above, which just says real studies with real numbers, that our evidence is better for that reason. Cool. Negative keeps going. In response to 2AC3, they say negative evidence is more recent. And then they also read a new piece of evidence. So right here, something you'll notice is that whenever I flow evidence, I write down the tagline, so deep sea mining bad. And then I never really write down the authors because judges and just in general, something to remember is that people remember arguments a lot more than the authors. So what I do whenever I hear a piece of evidence being read is I just put an X and a line through just to indicate that evidence was read. You'll see that all the arguments above don't have that, which means the negative is mainly going just pure line by line, pure analytics, just using knowledge from what was already brought up in the round to refute the AF's arguments. So, the negative did not just start off by dumping a bunch of cards. They started by first engaging the affirmative, and now like way down here, way towards like half of the flow, we'll see the first piece of evidence being read by the negative. So the negative is going pretty hard on this whole deep sea mining turn. They're really defending this argument. And then as we scroll down, we'll see that in response to the 2AC's arguments about how deep sea mining technology is good and how it in fact doesn't fail, because remember, all these 2AC arguments right here are in direct response to these 1C arguments that say deep sea mining fails because of technology reasons. The 2AC has extended cards that say deep sea mining technology is good. All the negative has said here is cross apply the above. So they're cross applying the deep sea mining turn argument that deep sea mining makes the environment worse. And then they said deep sea mining bad means none of this matters. So they are banking on the fact that they are going to win all of this debate right here, that deep sea mining is worse for the environment. They've essentially said that, I don't really care about these arguments anymore. None of this matters because we want to win this argument that deep sea mining is bad. And deep sea mining is bad is this entire debate up here. And so now the negative has really limited itself. Based on this, we can predict that the negative strategy, and the only strategy that exists based on this flow, is that in the 2NR, they must go for deep sea mining bad. That sets up whoever this 1AR speaker is, whoever my partner is in this instance, to flag at the top for their overview of the 1AR to identify the negative's main form of offense, which is this deep sea mining turn, and then just make sure that that is the one thing they answer the most. So this is how the flow can be used to predict your opponent's strategy, but it can only be done if you're able to flow correctly. The last piece of advice that I'll leave you with is you'll notice that the flow is vertical. Should have put it in the golden rules, but I hope you're not doing this. Do not flow like horizontally. Always keep your flow vertical. The reason is because, like I said, arguments proliferate across, like arguments get big like as the debate goes on. You'll see that this 1C argument right here about the deep sea mining turn initially started off very small. It got into 2AC arguments, then it got even bigger, right? Against these 2AC arguments, the negative read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different arguments. So do not do it horizontally because you're going to end up flipping the page a lot more, and you might even need to use two flows for just one type of argument in debate, and you don't want to do that. Hopefully this helped, and good luck in your debates.